Okay, we're back. And with us, there's Merlyn Janssen, and he is one of the HEMA veterans in the Netherlands, perhaps the world, Merlyn. Who might tell? You're co-founder of, of Zwaardkring, at least. And you have a very interesting workshop for us concerning the common archetypes in HEMA. I'm very curious to learn what that all means. So I would suggest I would suggest you to take it away, and afterwards there will be a short Q&A session because people can put their questions in the YouTube chat. So thank you for being here, and have fun.
Yeah, okay. So I had planned to do a lecture about archetypes in sword fighting, which is named "What kind of sword fighter are you?" So I hope you guys will all find it very interesting. And and of course I'm very interested in the questions and remarks you might have at the end. The basics of what I'm trying to tell you here was actually laid by Guy Windsor, was the chief instructor of the School of the European Sword. And he wrote this article about archetypes in HEMA, I think it was 18 years ago. He described 3 types of fencer characters that could be used as to describe fencers in general. An archetype, in this case, a basic aspect of personality that a person can have, their actual personality being formed by a combination of archetypes that can change dominance in time. One archetype of your personality coming to the forefront, while others take a back seat or simply are inactive. In my HEMA career, I found these archetypes to be very useful for determining how to best coach and treat fencers in training, but also my own attitude towards situations and challenges I faced. Now, over time, my definitions changed somewhat from the archetypes described by Guy Windsor, and I added some extra basic archetypes and sub-archetypes along the way. But in this lecture, I would like to discuss the 4 basic archetypes I use these days. And in this lecture, I'll be referring to fences, but of course, all of this could be used for HEMA in general, or martial arts in general. 4 basic archetypes. In my experience, most fencers can be classified in one of 4 basic archetypes. These archetypes being the fighter, or also the thug, technicians, spiritualists, and peacocks. Now, some of these archetypes some of these names might be somewhat unflattering, but all these archetypes have their pitfalls and their pluses. So, none of these archetypes is inherently bad or good. So, these archetypes are based on the personal mental attitude that one has regarding fencing in its totality. In reality, most people will be a combination of these archetypes, but usually during training or events, one of these archetypes is dominant. So let's get into the descriptions. The first one being the fighter. Guy Windsor named this character the thug, but I thought that was a bit of a derogative term. People won't like to be called a thug. So fighter is a bit more neutral and also covers the basics, I think. It's one of the most common type of fencers these days. These persons, they want to spar, they want to fight, and they want to win. And for them, the best part of the training is the part where they can spar. And if training was less about technique and more about sparring, they would be happier for it. They want to be good at sparring as soon as possible. They will usually gravitate towards sparring and contact drills and feel that what is where the real sword fighting can be found. This attitude will see them quickly develop their reflexes and fighter instincts, and they tend to have little or no fear of the possible consequences of their gung-ho attitudes. Bruises, scrapes, and small injuries are usually a mark of pride, and quite soon they will be able to hold their own in sparring. To others, the fighter can seem somewhat reckless. Sometimes these are the persons that hit too hard, too aggressive, or are simply annoying because they will not adhere to the exercise given because they know something that works better. For the fighter, the sword is a tool to use. techniques and ancient lore are but utilitarian. What works is quickly incorporated in the repertoire, and techniques that are not relevant for competition or that can be not easily mastered are disregarded. A lot of fencers I know started out as fighters, and this attitude is prevalent in many martial arts and sports, or competition fencing, and self-defense classes, where the goal is simply to win. It is an attitude that brings an easy sense of accomplishment when you have the natural athleticism or talent for hitting people. So that's the first archetype. The second one is the technician. This archetype is less common. These persons want to collect as many techniques as they can. Instinct reflexes have little to do with their approach to fencing. They don't want to win a fight with simple basic strikes that anybody can come up with. They don't want to win because they are faster or stronger, but because they have superior knowledge. The idea that a skilled swordsman could defeat someone bigger and stronger with less knowledge is their ideal. When it comes to sparring, most of these technicians will not accomplish a great feat or a great deal because most techniques take time to understand and master. But with patience and perseverance, they can in time become excellent fencers. This is usually the case of people knowing a technique, but when they spar, they can't really pull it off. And sometimes that's frustrating. A true technician will be very motivated to work on that and try and make that work. Because, the ancient manuals say they work. And in slow training, it works. So in sparring, it should also work. It's a bit of a pitfall there, but all archetypes have these. For a technician, sparring and competition is a way to test their techniques, to see how they fare in a more realistic environment. Actually, winning comes second. For the technician, the sword is also a tool, and they use it to better themselves, not necessarily to win. Then the third archetype is the spiritualist. This third archetype is the most rare of all. These persons fence for the mental and spiritual satisfaction they attain during fencing and training. In their hands, the sword becomes an archetype in and of itself, an ideal, an icon. They will tirelessly train and practice for hours to perfect a certain strike, position, or technique, alone if needs be. The wielding of the sword, or simply just handling the sword, is a purpose unto itself. And spiritualists take many forms, from people who practice fencing for self-enlightenment, character building, or to find peace in the daily hustle and bustle of everyday life. Most will find that fencing and practicing HEMA is an addition or completion of their own personality, a way of life. If you think about HEMA, more than most regular people think about HEMA or their chosen sport, if you find yourself training alone in the cold, if your swords and HEMA gear find their way into your living room wall, if you have the dedicated sword room in your house, and for the backdrop for your online conference calls, you see swords, you might be a spiritualist. Or the last archetype, the peacock. So the fourth archetype, the peacock, is one of the archetypes I use that Guy Windsor did not use in his own idea of archetypes. So this is one of my own additions. And that was mainly formed due to the fact that there was another prevalent archetype clearly there in most groups and sword fighting events that was not readily defined by one of these three. So, the peacock appeared. So the fourth archetype, the peacock, is usually known by the rest of the club or seen as that guy. Most people have no trouble spotting peacocks, but are hard-pressed to admit that they might be one themselves. The peacock loves the image of the romance of the sword and the sword fighter, and they want to be one. This generally does not translate into a willingness to train hard or apply self-criticism. The social aspect of the club seems more important than training. Certainly training extra hard or training at all. HEMA is a jewel that they wear, and no one needs to know how good they actually are. The fact you are part of a club, wear the cool t-shirt, and that fencers in your own group accept you, makes you a fencer, a sword fighter. Usually the peacock is very busy talking about HEMA. They are very good at getting the word out and continually want to tell people they have just met all about HEMA. all the while being secretly very happy it is a niche sport, an unknown martial art, unique and certainly not mainstream. As such, peacocks will love telling other people about the misconceptions regarding swords and armor, maybe even more than actually wielding a sword. In a lot of cases, peacocks are not able to train as hard as they would like, due to a myriad of reasons. The fact that they talk more and train less is not all some sort of character flaw. Sometimes it has good reasons, and there are very long, but there's lots of reasons I've heard over the years. Put short, the peacock likes to wear the feathers of the sword fighting, but are one mostly in name alone. So, these 4 archetypes, I think most people will recognize some of these archetypes. Usually, when archetypes like this are described, we jump easy to the conclusion that other people are, oh, he's a fighter, oh, he just perfectly described that guy. But what you should actually be doing is trying to reflect on yourself, your own personality and attitude regarding these archetypes. Because I think everybody has some of these archetypes in their own personality. That's why they're called archetypes. You all have this. We all have a bit of a peacock or a fighter or a technician in ourselves. So the true sword fighter, everybody has a character or attitude towards HEMA that is in fact a mix of these 4 archetypes. Very few people are solely defined by one of these. And even so, if that is the case, that is usually a transitional situation. That being said, it is my observation that usually one of the archetypes is dominant, while some are less active and others are simply not present, so it seems. By focusing on your strengths and aligning yourself with the dominant archetype, you can experience quick and easy success and achievement, but this comes at a price. Before long, you will hit a proverbial wall or ceiling, a point beyond which you cannot seem to advance. The key here is to focus on the other less developed and defined characteristics, exploring the other archetypes. The sword is a means to defend, entertain, and better yourself physically, mentally, and maybe even spiritually. So why should you limit yourself to just one archetype? To further illustrate this, I would like to tell you about 2 situations, cases, if you would call them that are things that I regularly spot and see during my own training, in my own club, and even in events. I think of all the possible situations that can arise regarding archetypes, these 2 are the most interesting cases because they happen a lot and also affect your club a lot. So, the first one is one that I would call the Icarus dilemma. So, for you peeps out there who are really proficient in Greek mythology, Icarus, a guy and his son wanted to fly off high into the air, but they flew too high, too close to the sun, so their wings started to melt and burn up, and then they crashed and died, something like that. You could also call this the problem-facing fighters, people that have the fighter archetype as their main archetype. So, in the beginning, HEMA groups attracted mostly spiritualists and peacock archetypes, people that were drawn to the aesthetic and or perceived image of the sword due to the rapid development and implementation of safer protective gear and a growing tournament scene in the last 15 years. Sparring and contact-based exercises became more common. And this transformed HEMA from a soft, theoretical, non- or semi-contact martial art into a full contact sport, a combat sport even. And thus more and more fighter archetypes started emerging. Most of these fighter archetypes are quite athletic and or naturally talented, and they immediately excel at sparring, giving people many years their superior in training a run for their money. They usually use very basic techniques and have a small bag of tricks that they use every time with great success. And I think everybody knows some people in their club or in the scene that, picked up HEMA a year ago and already won tournaments or placed high. Those are the kind of people we're talking about in this dilemma. Meanwhile, while this is happening, most technicians in your club, they know how to theoretically counter these fighters because, you know, they use very little technique, they have very simple tricks, but in practice they can't. These fighters tend to have little interest in techniques that they find difficult and are focused on winning with what comes easy, what comes naturally. Quite often more interested in sparring than in technical drilling and, you know, annoying stuff like footwork and control. At some point, usually sooner than later, these fighter archetypes hit the proverbial ceiling. They have risen to the top of the club in a few years or months, and now progress comes to a grinding halt. They meet people who are just as athletic and talented as they are, but who have better technique, train harder, drill more. And they have to face the fact that the only true way of breaching that ceiling is by mastering other techniques and improving on their basics. This means footwork and posture technique drills and training stuff that they were never really good at. Stuff that up till now they didn't need and never thought they would like. Stuff in HEMA that, you know, the least favorite stuff that they could avoid and still have success, but now they can't. So they have to transform themselves. They have to take up the mantle of the spiritualist or the technician, and some regrettably become peacocks, unwilling to do the work and basking in their former glory. Most of these fighters hang around for a while and then they quit, feeling that they can't progress any further at the speed they'd like, so they seek another path. And I've seen this many times. People with great talent, they show up. They have a great aptitude for sparring, but then when they hit that ceiling, and in order to progress, they have to train more and be more serious about the stuff that they find boring. They figure, well, I've learned all I can learn from this club, and so I will go away and try another martial arts or sports or whatever. They get bored because for them, the training becomes too repetitive, there's far too little sparring, and they're not progressing anymore. Unwilling to face the fact that their fighter mentality and their unwillingness to train hard and be more invested in techniques is actually holding them back. So they have to change, and many people don't like change, so they don't change and they just go away and do something else. And this is a dilemma that causes many clubs to lose potentially very talented fighters. So when I see this happening in a club, you know, I always try to get these fighter types to be interested more in technique, to open their eyes to the fact that techniques that they found difficult with little training actually become a very handy tool in their box, and open up the gate towards looking out for other archetypes and other means of becoming a better swordsman, by not just simply keep on doing what you're doing. The other one that I would like to share with you all is the self-fulfilling prophecy of peacocks. It's my other favorite archetype, the peacock. So although most people would not like to admit it, a lot of us started as peacocks when we started HEMA. We were drawn to the sword fighting because, you know, you thought it was cool, feeling that this martial art, the skillful swordsperson could best the stronger, bigger opponent. With you know, the true virtues of skill and knowledge. So usually, you know, people they were not really strong, they were not really fit, they weren't really athletic. But with a sword, you can defeat someone bigger, especially if you are you've been taught the ways of the sword. And we see this in fancy movies all the time, old grey men easily defeating younger fit guys. There's this scene in The Karate Kid where this old guy beats up 5 young guys that are bullying the entire school. We somehow have the idea that if you pick up the sword and you practice this, you will immediately become good. Now, of course, if you pick up a sword against unarmed persons with very little skill, you have an astute advantage. But one-on-one with another swordsperson, that advantage is out of the window. So these people usually are very interested in all the cool techniques, but not really athletic or fit. Sword fighting was a nice mix of cool history, fantasy, and certainly not mainstream. And maybe these peacocks, or you yourself, were a metalhead, and the sword fighting seemed very metal, or gaming geek with aspirations to read life into your RPG or fantasy novel experience. It's all about the look and the feel. And You are enthusiastic, but not necessarily very talented. And because you were not really good at sword fighting yet, your group activity experience seemed to be 50% training, 50% talking about swords. And in fact, sword fighting was more of a social thing, where you could lose yourself in the world of the warrior. Every week you wielded a sword, while the rest of the world was oblivious to this cool way of life. And after a while, a lot of peacocks retain their enthusiasm for the sport, and by training hard, they actually become competent sword wielders. Training becomes more fun than just talking about it. And you notice that in time, you might actually become better in HEMA than you had ever thought possible. From here, the peacock can become a fighter, a technician, or even a spiritualist. And usually these former peacocks become excellent promoters of your club or school, wanting to spread the gospel, organize events, or even take up the mantle of a board member of your organization. The peacock becomes that what he or she was always talking about, a competent member of a group or a school. So while most people tend to see these people that like to talk but don't really walk the walk as a nuisance in their school, I have noticed over the years that these people, because they are so enthusiastic, they have great potential. And as long as they feel at home and are somewhat challenged to try to do more than just talk, they can actually become very good. And also we must realize that not everybody that comes to train in your club has the ambition or the ability to become, one of the top fighters. You can't have a school that's all top fighters. Even there is a ranking. And a lot of people, they sword fight because, it's social, it's nice, it's fun. Swords are cool. Talking about swords might be just as nice and cool as actually handling a sword. And also, this enthusiasm can be used. So people train, but they can also be a valuable member of your community, going along on that enthusiasm without annoying anyone. So, of course, there are many other dilemmas and cases, like the spiritual quagmire or the toxic fighter takeover or the created surrealism of the master engineer. But in most cases, I think for archetypes, everybody can relate to it. It's usually easier to mark other people as one of these archetypes and actually applying it to yourself, which is hard. But yeah, I think this is a very useful way of categorizing people and yourself, and ways to mark your progression. I myself, I think I started out as a peacock and as a spiritualist. I was very interested about sword fighting, but had no idea where to start. There were no schools teaching it, so we started school ourselves. We did our own research. And after a while, out of necessity, I became an engineer, trying to figure out all these techniques. And then when sparring became a thing, I immediately tried to do sparring to test my techniques as a true engineer or technician, and became a fighter. And now, well, I don't know what I am now. But I think a mix of these things. And I'm usually still more interested in techniques. But yeah, I think every HEMA practitioner is in fact a combination, a balance of these four archetypes. And none of them is truly good or bad. But if you focus only on one, there are very great pitfalls that you should be aware of. So, hope you guys think this is interesting. Don't know if any of you have any questions about this or remarks?
Yes, thanks, Merlyn, for this very interesting talk. And when I look at the chat on YouTube, apparently describing these archetypes cuts close to the bone for some people. They really hear themselves described. I was going to ask you what your own archetype was, but you already answered that question. And someone in the chat asked, coming from reenactment originally, I miss the historian and the actor / show fighter archetype, but I guess they are more rare in HEMA clubs. And perhaps you already kind of answered this question. Aren't they just peacocks, or is there such a thing as a kind of like an actor show fighter archetype?
Well, I think peacocks are very prevalent in reenactment, because when I first had interest in sword fighting, I tried to find a school where I could train sword fighting. So I ended up doing fencing and Asian martial arts. And then there were these reenactment groups that also said, we have sword fighting groups, we do European sword fighting. But before I could get to the actual sword fighting, there were all these hurdles about buying gear and creating your own character. And I noticed that most of these reenactment groups at the time were more concerned about looks than actual reenacting activities. And I think it's a thing you see in most reenactment groups, where people dress up like someone of a certain period, use tents of a certain period, but then they sit with their backs towards the guests of the event, and they talk about mortgages and cars instead of really acting like someone of that time. And even if they do just one or two questions and you break through their persona, and it's just a normal guy who can't really act out the fact that he's supposed to be a medieval person or a Roman person or something like that. So and they usually want to tell you all about history and all the things they know, and less doing it. And with doing it, I mean, the sword fighting or actually acting like a Roman or a medieval person. So I think peacocks are prevalent there, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're interested is relaying and telling with passion about history, well, that's a form of peacocking. You're actually acting as if you're a knight or a Roman soldier, but you're not. So how much more peacock do you want to get? You wear the feathers, but you're not it. So I think that's very prevalent in reenactment as well. But there's also it also has a seed of possible growth in it, because you are interested in knights or Romans or medieval warfare. For many people, it becomes very natural, a natural step of progression to then actually want to train it. So we see in our group that lots of people that train in our groups are actually part of reenactment. From reenactment, they started to do HEMA, and some of the people that do HEMA, they know these people, and they talk, and then they started to do reenactment as well. So it's really a crossover, two scenes meeting, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I always applaud people who are more, want to know more about history.
Cool. Thank you. Another question that popped up was, how does the knowledge of these archetypes help you teach people? In what ways does the way you categorize a person change how you teach them? I'm not sure if you categorize them, but
yeah. So I think if you're an instructor, you always need to be aware of the group processes in the group you train. It's not just about giving them the right exercises and making sure they're taught in the right way. It's also about knowing the people you instruct, knowing that one person is not very popular in the group, seeing that one person is very focused on one thing but completely disregarding the others. So if you see, for example, that there is a peacock that is mostly talking and never training, that at some point people will simply say, oh, that's that guy that never trains and always sits by the side. So in order to protect these people from these kind of situations, you want to approach them and maybe get them to train a bit more, be more active, or let the rest of the club know that this person has lots of knowledge and he's not just talking crap, but he's actually very enthusiastic. And but while fighters, for example, they can become very annoying to all the rest of the club. I had several persons who, as soon as I gave them a technique to practice, they were like, oh, this will never work in reality. This is illegal in tournaments. I can't use this in a real fight. Why should we train this? Or, they have a very strict toolbox of techniques in which they are very good. And as soon as you try to teach them, for example, a different kind of disarm, they tend to not train that disarm, but use the disarm that they already know and mastered, which is very annoying for their training partners. So if you see stuff like, if you know someone is a fighter, it's always very wise to look for these kinds of behaviors during training, so you can, steer them in the right direction. technicians, technicians or spiritualists might actually be very good, but they don't want to spar, or they don't like to spar because they think it's all about, masculinity and beating and hurt and pain. And I think it's very valuable to actually motivate these people to try their techniques in a more real situation, which sparring actually is. Because I think I'm very adamant in my conviction that sparring is a form of training. It's an exercise. Tournaments as well, they should not be your end goal. I think if in HEMA tournaments become the goal, people train to win tournaments and only this, that opens up the possibility of us turning into something like sport fencing, which becomes so far away from the reality that a lot of people can't really take it seriously as a real form of sword fighting, which is a mistake as well. But yeah.
Why do you say that take it back to reality?
Yeah. Excuse me?
Why do you say that then it becomes very much removed from reality? In what way?
Okay, so the first time I actually did some fencing, we started to spar, knowing nothing about fencing. We just had a short lesson. At the end of the lessons, we could do some sparring. And we ended up double striking each other, double stabbing all the time. So for us, that was not good, because both of us were dead. But the trainer consistently was saying, oh, you did that very well, you did it very well, because apparently I kept on hitting the other guy a couple of milliseconds before he hit me, or I had something that they called the initiative. So my attack counted and his attack didn't. And because, the rules state that in certain situations you have right of way, actually, I noticed that a lot of people, they attacked like suicidal maniacs, knowing that as long as they were attacking, the other guy couldn't score a point. While in reality, the other guy can score a point. He can actually hit you, hurt you, and maybe even kill you. And just because you hit them a couple of milliseconds first, might be that you just hit them in the leg and they're perfectly fine. They can live, and they stab you in the eye and you die. So these sport rules in fencing are a nice way of, you have to nominate a winner. You can even use rules like that to steer people into a certain way of fencing. But in the end, the guy that actually won a tournament by points, if you had replaced these weapons with real swords, might actually be the guy that ended up losing, because the first hit went to the guy that lost, but the first hit would be a killing blow. So please don't mistake sport fencing or tournaments for real fighting. It's practice.
Right. Do you think there is an ideal combination of archetypes in a club? Like, can you have too many peacocks, too many fighters, or too few spiritualists? What would be like very roughly the ideal combination of members of a club?
I think that would be greatly determined by the style of club and lessons and training you want to provide. I think that if your club is mostly peacocks, that's not a good thing. You end up with people who mostly like to talk about it and never really train. And as soon as someone who's seriously interested in martial arts comes along and wants you to demonstrate, you can't, because you're not that good. You know it, but you can't do it. Also, if you have only fighters, you can get the situation where everybody just wants to spar and hit stuff, and people really don't have any interest into the historical background, the techniques, only use what works. I mean, there's people who have a set of rules for tournaments, and they mostly spar, training with those rules so they can win a tournament with these rules. Which means they're not practicing any of the techniques. Like, for example, if wrestling is outlawed in your tournament scene, why would you ever train wrestling with the sword or disarming? You're never going to use that in a tournament. It's not going to help you to win. So that can lead to, loss of knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
And perhaps you might actually use that knowledge of wrestling even if you're not permitted to wrestle in a given tournament, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and also some people they don't want to practice wrestling with the sword because they're not any good with it. But even if you practice this with people who keep on, throwing you to the floor and stuff like that, if in a tournament or another situation someone starts wrestling with you, the very fact that you've trained this, even though you weren't good at it, you can recognize the situation and you can still better count and escape and avoid wrestling. I mean, someone that can wrestle has a far greater chance of avoiding wrestling than someone who has no idea about how it works and how to recognize it. So it's always a valuable thing. And again, if you have a group of mostly fighters, they can also lead to a very toxic environment in which people, they applaud wounds and bruises, and all the battle scars are regaled as heroic victories, instead of saying, well, you keep on getting hit on your hands. Instead of being proud of the gigantic bruise, you should be thinking, damn, this could have been avoided. And also a group like that, I don't think a lot of people who might have been excellent fencers actually want to join that. There are some bowherd groups, for example, that work in that fashion. And a lot of people, they visit one training and it's like, oh, these guys are just madmen wanting to hurt each other. I have a day job. They're all bigger than me. I'm not going to join this club. This will just mean pain and I'll become a punching bag. So if you have all fighters, that's really bad. So I think you should have a mix. You should have a mix of these. And even then, one very charismatic spiritualist or fighter or peacock can actually string a lot of people along. So, yeah, I think if you have, for example, a group of beginners, it is best if they are technicians. They want to know techniques and they're not really tempted to go spar right away. But they're willing to do so if you ask that from them. While a starting group of only peacocks or fighters is a very difficult group to actually teach. So it will very much depend on the situation.
Right. Okay. I guess there's no really clear-cut answer to that question, indeed. But very interesting to hear that, actually. Another question that came up was from someone who said, I'd like to teach history in my classes, usually after classes, of course, because I think it's very important in this HEMA context. Would that make me a spiritualist or rather a technician? So I guess your verdict is asked for here.
So if you're interested in history and you want to get people to be interested in it, yeah, that could be a peacock or a spiritualist. I think a peacock has a very negative sound to it.
Well, this person actually said spiritualist or technician, but perhaps perhaps they are secretly a peacock. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. But a spiritualist is also. But that's the thing. If you like history and you like telling people about it, you are all these three archetypes have part of that in them. And that's the idea of an archetype. You're never one archetype. You are a combination.
Right. That's I guess very important for people to remember. That it's that they're not boxed into a single archetype, and that defines them.
Yes. So if you tell very interesting history facts that are a nice complement to what you're doing, you could be a peacock. Wanting to show off your knowledge. There's nothing wrong with wanting to show off knowledge, especially if you want to better other people with the knowledge. But on the same hand, you could be a peacock that tells complete unrelevant or untrue stuff and passing them along as facts, wanting other people to think you're great, and then you're actually doing people a disfavor. So,
is there an archetype for that? Is there an archetype for that?
No, it's a bad peacock. Yeah, they're also good peacocks.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. People who are interested in this stuff, and where can they learn more about these archetypes?
Yeah, well, they could talk with me. They could, I think if you ask Guy Windsor on the School of the European Sword, he has a very website where you can ask questions. I mean, he came up with these archetypes. Might be that, 15, 16 years later along the line, he changed his views, but I think it'd be very interesting to talk with you guys about this, and so would I. Also, I could post the article online describing the 4 archetypes people like.
Well, I think people would like that. If they do, they definitely should say so in the comment section in the chat. But that might be very interesting, because I thought maybe there's a book about it or something. But it's not that. It's more like there's an article and there's like knowledge about it, but it's not yet a book about this written. I understand.
Yeah, the thing is that if you start out with these archetypes, usually they struck a chord with people, and they say, well, I look like one of these archetypes, or I know someone that is a complete spiritualist. But then you'll notice that all of these archetypes could be negative or positive. And then if you, for example, a fighter who's all about fighting and macho is a fighter, but a fighter who wants to win and is really interested in sports and being athletic and active is also a fighter. One is negative, one is positive. So from these 4 basic characters, you can have several sub-characters, like the negative fighter, the positive fighter, and you can invent nice names for them, like, the negative fighter can be the thug who only wants to hurt people, or you could be, the jock or whatever. So it's very important to realize that all of these archetypes are not very negative or positive in their own right. They're just there, and how people use them or how other people view them will greatly determine if it's negative or positive. But it's a nice thing to be aware of. And yeah.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Merlyn. Actually, the chat, well, kind of, there was a minor explosion in the chat of people who said they would definitely like to read it. And someone is actually trying to make you write a book. So let's leave it at that. Our time is up. Thank you so much, Merlyn, for sharing your thoughts about the fencing archetypes. We'll definitely be thinking about that later on. Thanks, and we hope to see you again in the future.
You will.
Thanks.